Hey guys, it's Baban, and I've been figuring out how to draw lines and improve my line art. And well, this one I was kind of figuring out how to draw hair, so I'm gonna go over how to use line weights and make the lines look nicer. Okay, so before everything gets filled in, you can see how I started it off. Like I've just got the lines and the shapes down, and you can tell what it is, but it doesn't really look all that great. So if someone does look at it, they're going to be able to tell what it is, but it doesn't read in terms of where everything is in space. Say if you look at the top of it where I've got all the hair shape down, you can sort of tell where it goes up and down, but it's not immediate. You've got to look at each individual piece and see where it goes up and down. So as an artist, you want to actually be able to communicate things immediately rather than having people have to look at it and kind of dissect it on their own. You want to be able to communicate where everything is in space and how it works in terms of 3D space immediately when they look at it. So, how do we figure out how to communicate 3D space? Well, with painting, it's basically using straight edges, like straight cuts, like you can see where the darker lines are, and gradients, where I'm doing the bit of thatching. And I'd say this goes for more line art where you are doing this kind of style where it's going to look good just on its own, but if you're doing a simpler line art, then you don't really, especially if it's something you're going to go and paint more, then you don't really have to put as much in. Okay, so sharps and gradients, where do they go and how do we figure that out? Well, first off, you need a light source, and you can maybe see on this that I've got like a sort of halo in there, and that's the light source that I'm using for all this. Whatever light source you're using though, make sure you keep it consistent because that will help a lot with actually making it look like a 3D thing. Okay, so sharp edges, where do we use sharp edges? Well, obviously in the name it's a sharp edge, so where you can see I've added them in where the hair cuts off, and underneath where the hair is, if there's a big lump of it and it's underneath, showing the shadow underneath it, because there's a sharper cut between the shadow underneath it and where the hair is, rather than the softer gradient on the smooth sort of curves of the hair when it's in a chunk together. You can also add in these sharp lines around the edges to show weight to something, so you can see how I'm adding it around like the edges of the chunks of hair. That gives them a bit more weight, rather than if they had thinner lines they'd look a lot more wispy. At the same time, you can use this on if you're drawing skin, so if there's somewhere with a bit more weight to it, then it'll probably have a thicker line around it to show a bit of weight, like say around the thighs or anywhere there's a bit more sort of weight. At the same time, you can use this when you're drawing skin, like it'd be somewhere where there's a bit more fat, and really what you got to think about is where are the shadows going to be going, and it's sort of like adding in a bit of the shadows but not putting them all in, just showing enough shadow for it to communicate that there is a shadow there and that's where there's maybe more weight to something. Now with the gradients, if I were to relate both of these to how you'd shade a shape, I'd probably relate the edges to if you had, say, a V shape cut into a block and you shone light on it, then it's gonna make a clear cut between one shade and another. But with the gradients, it's a bit more like if there was a circle or maybe a cylinder, then the rounded edge of it is going to be a more gradual, well, gradient. And you can see here where I've added the gradients, and it's either where it's going from complete black or where it's just sort of fading out slightly. And it's all on more rounded, like where there's raised and inverted sort of shapes going up and down like the hair does. And you'll be able to see now in a minute where I start drawing in the rest of the piece, and I block everything out like I did with the hair again, and then later I go and add in where all the thicker lines and gradients are. Another technique you can use is, you can see where I've put a line under the nose. Some people like to put a line where the gradients start and stop so that they know where to fill it in, so you can block the shape out first. It's sort of like if you're cell shading, I've done it in the ears as well there. That can really help if you're trying to work more on the shapes and you're not so sure, not confident enough to just go and do it freely like this. Or if you just have sharper shapes or want sharper shadows that are somewhere between the thick lines and soft gradients. And with the gradients, there's a lot of different ways of actually getting those. There's like different techniques for hatching, and where you've got like two lines making, you know, lots of like crisscross the X's rather than just doing one continuous lot of lines going one way. If you look up like hatching techniques or cross hatching, you'll probably be able to find a lot of different ones that you can play around with, but these are the ones that I usually tend to use. And like I said at the start, you can see now compared to when it started that if you look at it, it reads immediately as something that is 3D. Rather than just being shapes that you kind of have to figure out which is what's where and what's above what. I think really the point of this again is that if you're drawing something that halfway through it will look crappy, like if you're drawing or doing line art or if you're colouring, halfway through it will look shit, but just keep going and you'll be able to fix it. You just gotta know the cheeky tricks to make it look better. You gotta know how to polish the turds. If you're into doing this kind of line art stuff as well, it kind of helps to look at graphic design stuff, because with that you can just slap some colours on in like blocks and make it look decent. Like you don't have to put a lot of effort into making it look presentable, other than just having the line art on its own. You can put a bit more over it and make it look 10 times better. I'll start colouring it in a minute and it'll start to look a lot better. Again, like I said, it's just knowing how to polish the turds. Another thing I had trouble with for a while was when you've got like the basic shape down for everything like I'm adding in now, and then you go and add in the darker shading, or well the sharper edges, then if you add that inwards of the original shape then it'll make it look like it's more in shadow, but if you add it outwards of the original shape it's going to give it a lot more weight. Another thing that's good to add in is small details, like you'll see I'll add in some small dots on the lobster and stuff in a minute, and it's sort of compensating for not having any colour or, you know, anything past the gradient and sharp shading in there. And it also means that you don't have like huge spaces where there's nothing, like you don't want too many big empty spaces and you don't want too much, or well, too many lines. That's another thing though, like keeping a balance between lines and where there's no lines. And I should be going in with the colour in a second. Yeah, you can see I added in more of the gradients into the eyes and stuff and around the face. And yeah, I go with the colour, and I added in some, not gradients, textures as well, because textures can sort of make things a bit more interesting as well. I also ended up going in and adding in some highlights because I thought it still looked a little bit flat even though it sort of had that depth in it. I wanted to make it sort of a bit more painted, but yeah, I thought it looked a bit like sort of stonework. What with all the hair, it sort of reminded me of carved stonework, so I thought, oh, I'll add in some highlights and make it look a bit more like that along with the texture, so yeah. And even though I have added in the highlights, I think afterwards I did go and clean those up a bit more. And same thing with them, I used gradients and straight edges. I used like straight cuts with them, through them with the transparency layer, so yep. Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of the video now, so I hope this helps someone. I'll leave links to my commission info and all my other websites and stuff in the description. Thanks for watching, bye bye!